Bach, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Winger?
Here.
Mr. Kramer?
Here.
Mrs. Turner?
Here.
Mrs. Carroll? Here. Mayor Fletcher?
Here. This meeting is specifically to set the millage rate for the coming year. Under public hearings, part 2, I'll read the first one, and then I'll give staff their introduction. An ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, providing the levy of ad valorem taxes for the fiscal year 2013-2014 at a millage rate of 2.0336, which equates to $2.0336 per $1,000 of assessed property value. At this time, Cindy, you want to do your dance for us?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Not on the table, please.
Not on the table. This is, unlike our workshops, a formal hearing to adopt our tentative millage and our tentative budget. And because we have some very specific requirements in the statutes, in the truth and millage laws, I'd like to just recap just quickly what those requirements are so we stay on the up and up as we go through this. The first thing, and you have a copy of this, I think, in front of you. The law requires that the first substantive issue that we discuss is the percent increase in the millage rate we're proposing to adopt over the rolled back rate that we need to fund the budget, and why. For this particular tentative millage, what we're proposing for adoption is the prior year's millage rate of 2.0336, and that is actually 0.96% more than the rolled back rate, which is 2.0142. At this point in time, the budget sits with about a $227,000 unappropriated surplus. But the reason we're suggesting that we leave it that way is we're still not completed or even probably substantially through our union negotiations. And so one of the things that concerns us is that we may, as we move through this defined benefit plan freeze to a defined contribution, need to have the flexibility to be able to do some matching of employee contributions. And for each 1%, that would be $60,000 or so out of the general fund. So we're suggesting at the time that we adopt this budget with last year's millage rate, leave ourselves the flexibility. And to
Cindy,
put it in,
I have a question.
Sure.
Would that not, though, put us in a disadvantage in bargaining to have this, what could be deemed a pot of money sitting there as we go into negotiations? As we continue with negotiations?
Let me respond to that. The answer is no, I don't think it does, because there are other issues that we have to cover if something comes up under that. For example, dune restoration, we have $40,000 in there. Cost us $153,000 last year. What we're saying is this: the primary thing that we'll be looking at, and this is not a leading number, but it is a number that would help us in good faith negotiations with the Teamsters Union in order to address that. We realize that conversion from, and we're only using that as one issue, but it is the biggest issue, is going from the defined benefit to a defined contribution plan. And in order to make that work, and especially in the first couple of years before we have the electric sale.
And that is something that this council has asked you to do for the last couple of years. So we appreciate moving forward along that path. And
there are, several other assumptions in the budget that assume that the offers we've made on everything are going to be accepted that affect, other monetary considerations as well. The other thing is $227,000 out of almost $5 million is not a particularly large unappropriated surplus, at least in our opinion. So that's what we're suggesting. And again, we can elaborate some more on that when we talk about the budget itself. The next thing is to keep in mind that the millage rate must be adopted before the budget, and it has to be by separate votes. Now, that's a confusing thing, and certainly if you as a council would like to discuss the budget before you adopt the millage, procedurally you can open the millage hearing, put it aside, open the budget hearing, put it aside, and go back. But at the end of this, you have to adopt the millage ordinance first, then the budget ordinance second. This is a public hearing, and so you're required to take comments, and the general public is allowed to speak and ask questions before you adopt either of these measures. Before you adopt the millage levy ordinance, we are required to read some things into the record, so we would ask that after you make a motion and before you vote, give Tammy or I the opportunity to read Section 1 and Section 2 of the ordinance itself into the record so we meet those requirements. And then finally, if you are inclined to make any amendments to the budget as we adopt it, we would need for you to make that motion prior to adoption of the ordinance and make it as specific as possible. So the budget as attached to that ordinance as amended to XYZ if you have the desire to make any amendments. And we'll walk through that as we go if you do decide to amend it. So with that, it's a public hearing, and we're at your pleasure.
We'll open the public hearing at this time. If anyone would like to speak to the council about the budget, please come forward now.
This would be on the millage rate.
On the
Mr.
millage
Mayor.
rate.
On the millage rate only, which is the only one I read. Yes. Mr. Gorey? Okay. Seeing no one from the public, we'll close the public hearing. Public hearing is closed. Any comments from the council?
It's amazing. I've done this several times, and the thing is, it's still clear as mud as to exactly how this process goes. And I know you just explained it, but you're wanting a motion from the council to set the millage rate, and then we can talk about the budget?
Well, you have to, at the end of the day, you have to vote on millage, actually adopt this ordinance before you can adopt the budget ordinance. But if you want to open this hearing, take comments from the public, and then just put it aside and open your budget hearing and talk about that, you can. But before it's all said and done, this is the ordinance that must be adopted first, and they must be adopted by separate votes. Does that help? So it's not that you have to do this and then the other.
So we talk about we adopt the millage first, and then we talk about the budget.
And then you talk about the budget and adopt it. But however you do it, when it comes to the vote, this has to go first, budget has to go second.
Okay.
Even if you talk about both or open them both and discuss them both.
So are there any comments about the millage?
Well, I kind of do. I'm kind of partial to going towards the rollback rate if we've got 227 over. If Jim has got places to stick that money, I'd rather see it put in a budget someplace rather than just sitting out there bare.
Well, again, as the finance director said, and Cindy made note, $227,000 out of $19 million is a relatively small, unencumbered balance to move forward. Especially, we're in the process of actually two negotiations. One is with the police, and as a matter of fact, they have filed for impasse just the other day. And then we also have the Teamsters. So in both of those union, and we also in the Teamsters contract. Again, bargaining in good faith, but at the same time, we have been given the direction that you all want to proceed in, and that big issue is the pension. We don't have a place to say that it'll go in the pension, it'll go in this one. And so to me, to have that flexibility to make some of those decisions as we move forward is imperative in a budget. A budget is really, as you know, is just a plan moving forward. It's a relatively small percentage of the total numbers.
Do you have a timeline when the pension issue is going to get?
If I had my way, it'd be by October the 1st, but to be very honest with you, I do not believe it'll be done by that time. I think we may have some challenges that, again, it may be an impasse that we have to discuss that in front of a master and come back to you.
At that time, then, are we going to probably modify the budget? Do you start doing budget amendments? And
You probably would if it's required to do so, yes, sir.
Okay.
I like the flexibility of leaving this money in the budget. I would leave it where it is at the 2.0336.
Are you making that as a motion, Mr. Mayor?
I will make that as a motion.
I will second it.
For discussion, I just want to make one comment that despite all the efforts that we have made to going through this budget, the proposed budget is not even 1% less than last year's budget.
Yeah.
Just want to make that real clear that despite whatever cuts people think were made, we're still not even 1% lower than last year's budget.
Good point.
We do need to address that, and I believe Cindy is ready because there was a balance issue that took place on a debt service payment. But
right. We had this conversation with the Finance Commission. Back in 11-12, we prepaid a big debt service payment, almost a $700,000 debt service payment. So in 12-13, we had a holiday from that payment. So if you, and that makes these comparables terrible to look at, if you actually take the 12-13 adopted budget and add the $700,000 debt service payment to it that should have happened in that particular year, the difference between the 12-13 budget and what we're proposing for the coming year is about a little over $700,000, about 710, which is close to 4%. So that, making that early debt service payment makes, if you look at 11-12, makes it look really high, and then 12-13 looks really low, and then you come back to the middle.
So any savings are strictly deploying finance, changing our financing of our debt?
Actually,
case in point.
No, if 12-13 had been adopted the way it should have been on our normal debt schedule, the 12-13 budget would have been $20.1 million and not 19.4. So that's what, it kind of distorts it a little bit. And it's so, the real savings from a normalized budget to this year's budget are more like 3.6%. So.
Any other comments?
Also, over time, the last 3 years, what is the total dollar amount that we have?
Again, that's tough because in 11-12, not only did we make an early debt service payment, we had about $2.7 million in proceeds that also became a payment out, and that was the year we changed our approach to budgeting for grounds maintenance. It used to all be in the recreation fund, which made a big recreation fund transfer. We took it out of the recreation fund and put it back into the general fund, and then made the transfer smaller. So to look at 11-12 is just, there's probably about 4 or 5 things that send that in strange directions. So,
But if you look
probably
at
another 3 or
general
4%.
general fund reduction from the what we had in general fund, let's say in 2010-11.
I could go back and pull the 10-11 before we get to the budget discussion, because I do have the CAFR here, and that might be a better number than.
Because I think there has been a substantial dollar amount reduction in the total, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 to $2 million over the last few years. So there has been some cost reduction.
Any other comments by council? Any other comments by staff? We have a motion and a second. I'm ready to vote.
And before the vote, if you would read the Section 1 and Section 2 into the record.
Section 1, the City of Vero Beach shall levy a general ad valorem tax of 2.0336 mills against the value of all real and tangible personal property within the city limits, subject to taxation on the first day of January 2013 to finance current operating expenses of the city. The tax shall be assessed and collected in the manner provided by law. Section 2, the fiscal year 2013-2014 operating millage rate of 2.0336 levied hereby is greater than the rollback millage rate of 2.0142 mills by 0.96%.
And would you call the roll, please, on the issue?
Mr. Winger?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
No.
Mrs. Turner?
No.
Mrs. Carroll?
Yes.
Mayor Fletcher?
Yes.
Motion passes 3-2.
Second ordinance, 2B, an ordinance of the City of Vero Beach, Florida, adopting the annual budget of the city for the fiscal year beginning October 1st, 2013, and ending September 30th, 2014, appropriating funds for the operating expenses, supplies, and personnel, and otherwise appropriating funds for the effective and efficient operation of the government of the City of Vero Beach and its departments, such appropriations being from anticipated revenue, providing for a means to amend the annual budget to carry forward the funding of purchase orders, work orders, grants outstanding as of September 30th, 2013, providing a means to amend the annual budget to reflect grants received after September 30th, 2013, and authorizing the transfer of funds appropriated so long as the total combined appropriations shall not be increased thereby, providing for an effective date. This is a public hearing. If anyone from the public would like to speak on the issue, please come forward now. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing.
Good evening, Council. Good evening. Ken Daig, 1846 21st Avenue. I had a concern on the maintenance that your new contractor's doing that cuts the grass. Is this the appropriate time to talk about it in the budget, or should I wait?
You're on cue.
So I'm okay. Okay. A few days ago, we sent an email to the city manager, city clerk, and all the council members. Hope that you got it. It was dated 8/27/2013. And we had some concerns about the maintenance that's being done on the mainland, and I'll use these 2 park areas so you can get an idea what the areas that we're talking about, with Chicovee and Piece of Pie Park. We explained to you in our email that neighbors met together and talked and planned. They wanted a safer, healthier, and more pleasant neighborhoods and business districts. A lot of us worked very hard to get some needed maintenance in our neighborhoods, back to the parks, back to the right-of-ways that were not being taken care of. We also talked about having a greater police presence in our neighborhood, and we explained in our email the reasons why. I've stood before you all here in the past a little bit, explaining to you what was happening to us in the past with some of the crime issues, and a lot of those issues got addressed. That's why we were concerned about taking people away from our police department. We also, in our neighborhood meetings, we talked about a more proactive maintenance and sidewalk schedule to maintain our sidewalks around our parks and along some of our city right-of-ways in our mainland neighborhoods. We also talked about monitoring street lights to make sure when the light bulbs went out, especially in the areas that we had crime issues, that those areas would be taken care of, looked at, to keep the lights on at night, because when you have street lights on at night, it really deters crime, and there are statistics out there that prove that. Riding around the city here in the last, 4 or 5 days, I wanted to back check myself on the following issue. We have a number of street lights out in areas that we need tended to, and I just want to bring that to your attention. What we did not receive in some of our neighborhood meetings in the past is we did not receive the irrigation in our parks where needed, and it was explained to us with budget constraints that couldn't be done at that time. Maybe later on in the future they could plan reuse water to do the parks, and that was the discussion with that. One of the things that we take a look at on the mainland, and when some of us go over to the island side and we look at some of the island side parks, a lot of those are still very well maintained. I had asked about that, and they said, well, that's because they're irrigated, and they're a little bit higher priority parks than some of the ones on the mainland where we refer to them as pocket parks. I said, okay. Now, what's happened in the last number of months, and we're still in the budget cycle now, that we thought the monies were put there to take care of these areas that I just spoke to you about, they were being taken care of pretty decently, and that stopped. Now, I'm not going to go read the whole email that I sent you, but I added to it, and what I'll do when I'm finished, I'll make sure you get a copy of my second page for you all, but I'll just do a little couple of highlights for you. I'd like you to understand the following. When you cut back on our maintenance like you did with this new maintenance contractor, there's long-term ramifications, and we actually go backwards where it hurts us. It's detrimental to the well-being of our neighborhoods. We would like you not to reverse the positive progress that we have achieved in these neighborhoods. That's really concerning us. Last budget meeting, you talked about possibly putting $15,000 back into the maintenance program for these mainland areas, and some areas also on the island side. And I'll skip right to the last paragraph. We would ask you to either find a more professional landscape company and pay them what the job is worth, not just what you want to pay them, or allow our city employees to do what they have been trained and do very well. So we're asking your consideration in that as you move forward, if you can find a couple of extra dollars to do that maintenance. Now that brings me into your maintenance contract that you have with this company. I read through it, and I have a question. If you do want to terminate the contract, are you allowed to do that, or do you have to renew the contract? Because it looks like in here you have to renew it for an additional 2 years, and that's a question if you would like to answer it.
Mr. O'Connor?
No, I do not believe in money that we do not have to renew at all. As a matter of fact, if we find them in default of the contract, we can terminate the contract at any time.
Okay, because I found what I'm referring to on page 28. When I read through the document, I was concerned about weed eating and sidewalk edging back to Pisa Pie Park and Jacovi. That was not being done. Well, reading through your contract, it says no, close edging or with a string, like around a sign post or around our playground equipment, or sidewalk edging. What they have to do is just mow as close as they possibly can, which sometimes, last time I took the manager out and Councilman Winger, it was like 3 and 4 inches away from the signpost or some of our playground equipment. But it answered my question why there was no weed eating and what I call sidewalk edging. It says in the contract they're not to do that. The other thing that I read in the contract, their equipment is supposed to be well maintained, ready to go. They don't talk about sharpened blades, but well maintained equipment. Now, it just so happened when they were mowing some of these areas that I'm telling you about, I went to take a look to see what they were doing. There was a lot of misses. There was a lot of high grass. And when they cut the grass, there was big piles of it left on our playgrounds. In your specs, it talks about they're supposed to have the equipment where it pretty much, make this simple for you guys, cut it up and disperse it out over the lawn. Now, the other thing, if you wait quite a while and the grass is like a foot high or 14 inches, you have the big clumps of grass that sit on the playground fields and all. That is hard for youngsters to get through. It was mentioned at one of the meetings that piles of grass that are left on the field can be used as fertilizer. Well, I did some asking of some local landscape companies, quite large one, and they said when you leave piles of grass sitting out on good grass, it kills it. So it needs to be raked up. And they explained to me, they said, now when you come through and you do a good cut and you spread that grass over, it does work. You do a little bit of where it retains moisture and fertilizer, but not like what we had, those big clumps of grass. The other thing that I found when I was reading through this contract is they are, because this is a concern I had brought to you all a few meetings ago, they were leaving trash, pieces of wood, palm fronds, things of that nature, and chopping the stuff up. In the paperwork, it says they're supposed to clean up the trash. Well, your contractor's not doing that. Just want to point that out to you. Jacovi Park, that's a small pocket park. Now, today I went by, it's also a bus stop where little children, just little kids, they're maybe just about that high, get off the bus and walk into the park to see their moms and whatnot and go home. The grass is already high again. Now, before they cut it, a few weeks ago, it was really high. We had pieces of cement block in the park. We had big pieces of wood in the park from when we had the winds and whatnot. The point is this. The park is being utilized. Children do go in it. They do play there. It's not fair to these little ones and their moms that it's not well maintained or kept. They do use it. Now, before, when our city folk were taking care of it, I didn't have to stand here and practically beg you to take care of these parks for others, because they don't know to come in here or pitch a fit or things of that nature. A lot of them don't have the time, and some of them don't have the know-how. So I'm here on their behalf. It's not fair. It's not fair. The other question I had, they have, which I found this interesting, low maintenance mowing in certain areas, meaning they only have to do it, now I understand, once a month. It talks about the acreage. Question, if you would like to answer it, Jacovi Park, Pisa Pie Park, are they the low maintenance once a month? So you don't need to answer that if you don't want to.
I don't know the answer to that. I would defer to the city manager.
No, it is not. That
Okay.
is not a low maintenance.
There's not a area designation as low maintenance.
There is a designation, as it says in the code. Those would be like the parking areas along the streets and that kind of
okay.
stuff.
So what the bottom line is, reason for me being here tonight, is before you drop the gavel on the final monies allowed for our budget for the new cycle or the next cycle, could you please either put the city folks back onto the task, or please allocate the number was thrown out of $15,000. And if you're allowed to, go to the next higher bidder, whatever you guys got to do. But right now, it's not working. And I've taken enough people out there so their eyes could see what I was seeing. I didn't take each one of you all out there one by one, and I had said if you wanted me to, I would do that. So just if you would, please consider that. I thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
O'Connor,
Day.
would you please perhaps make some time for the citizen to take a look at what he's going and maybe meet with our department heads that can help him, maybe recreation and public works, and seeing if there's something we can do. I know we've talked about this contract a couple times now, and I believe we were under the impression that things were getting better as they made modifications and put a member of their staff on this. But just let's see what we can do for them.
We will do that, and I believe Monty has met with Mr. Degg at least once, if not more times, and had conversations, and we'll talk to him again. I'm sorry, he has not. Mr. Degg has met with me, but I think Monty Falls will talk to Mr. Degg following this and show him what we're doing. We think improvements are being made. That's from our perspective. As a matter of fact, they had crews out today. And they have
Mr. O'Connor, Mr. Whittle wrote an email about the condition of Riverside Park and the non-irrigated area. In other words, not around the gazebos, but towards the river. Last Saturday, we had the lagoon. I believe it was last Saturday, people there. And there was brown grass that covered up my feet that had been mowed. And there's got to be about 4 or 5 acres of grass there that people were walking in. And I was embarrassed for the city with the state of the grass, and it wasn't any different than I saw in Jacoby or Pisa Park. I've been there twice. I've seen it twice. Whenever you and I did it 4 weeks ago, and then I did it about a month before. So I'm still seeing piles of brown grass around, at least last Saturday, for what it's worth.
Mr. O'Connor, is it true that in this contract we are actually mowing less times per month than we were using city staff last summer?
No, ma'am. We geared this contract based on what we were doing. Mr. Falls put the specs together based on how we maintained.
So they're out there mowing exactly the same numbers of times that we did last summer. However, I believe we all realize that this has been a very, very wet summer, and there has been significant grass growth as far as from what I've read.
That is correct. We did not anticipate. We spec'd it out in our normal routine of mowing and the maintenance of our parks. We possibly would have sent more crews back in, as Mr. Degg said, on those due to the rainy days. We did not spec that because we only pay for what they cut and what they and the times that they're out there. So we did not spec that out on extensive days such as the rain that we've had.
And do we still own the equipment for cutting grass?
Yes, we do.
Mr. O'Connor, I don't think you and I agree on this, and that's okay. But I still think you need the additional $10,000 or $15,000. I mean, the reality, the whole thing is, well, we didn't spec it that way. Well, you can go to the adjacent areas in Riverside Park as an example, or you can go to parks that are irrigated, Young Park as an example, and they look fine, but the ones done by the contractor don't look fine. So I really think we're making a mistake not allowing more financing in case it's needed, but I stand in that ground for what's
Mr.
worth.
Mayor?
We are using.
We do have $270,000 of unallocated funds at this time, so I would leave that, yes,
Yes,
as a
and we
possible
would
budget
use that.
amendment or discretion of the city manager to administer.
Yes.
When is that contract up for renewal?
It'd be a year from last month before. Yeah.
June 1.
So June 1, we'll have the opportunity to drop this without any recourse from the
That is
contractor.
correct. Yes, sir.
Monty?
And rebid it if we wish to do so. Monty?
Monty Falls, Director of Public Works. We can drop it at any time for non-performance. I addressed the council at Mr. O'Connor's request at the last meeting and said we were having some struggles with the contractor, and the contractor agreed to put more manpower and equipment on the job. he has done that. We have monitored him daily since he put the extra crews on the job, and the work is getting better. I also said we did have some unsatisfactory work that left a lot of grass clumps in the parks, and it may not get better with one more mowing, but it's getting better. They mowed Indian River Boulevard, Bob Summers today. Jacoby and Piece of Pie are on the ticket again for tomorrow. So those will get back on the same schedule that we were doing them in the summer months, about twice a month, and then go down to that lower frequency as the growing stops. But Nanette Haynes visited the sites all today and met with the contractor, and in her opinion, they're doing the same work that we were doing. Mr. Degg is right. I'm glad he read the spec, because we took a lot of time writing it to do exactly what our mowing guys did. And we had 2 guys that mowed. They didn't do the other functions. Those are done by our other parks maintenance crews that do that landscape service in those parks once a month, where they go in and do the trimming and hedge trimming and those things. So I have great confidence in the private contracting policies that we have. We have a contractor that recognized he wasn't performing. He was given a warning. He did what he said and put additional manpower and equipment, and we will watch him closely. We know all eyes are on it, and if he doesn't perform, I'll be the first one to recommend that we do something else.
Thank you, Mr. Fall.
Peter Gorey, Chairman of the Finance Commission. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we have a requirement as a Finance Commission to give a third quarter review, and I think some of the direction that we're taking really is germane in terms of the issues you're speaking. So I wanted to talk briefly about that, and then secondly, and some recommendations we have. And secondly, we had a in-depth discussion of the 12, 13, 14 budget, and I was asked to give some observations. We're not making any recommendations, but just some observations as we go forward. For 3 quarters of the Financial Commission report, we looked at the budget for 3 quarters. The differences over and under are resolved in the proposed budget amendment. There are pushes and takes throughout the entire budget, but they are addressed in the budget amendment. One major revenue source that's underperforming is the investment income for both the general funds and the enterprise funds. And we have, with the staff, in depth, have discussed that, and in fact are going to, and are planning to have a review of our investments in terms of what is required and what our performance is versus standard metrics. Operating and administrative expenses are tracking lower than budgeted for 9 months. Revenues are greater in the general fund and all of the enterprise funds except Vero Electric, but has reduced cost, similarly for, in a minimal way, in recreation, but again with reduced cost. As we're tracking forward and as was presented to the Utilities Commission, we're on track in terms of the rate stabilization. And we're now into a rather, or have had a rather, now that the summer's over, hot summer that probably spiked the usage. In any event, one of the things that we tabled the last meeting, going into some of our recommendations, is the documents that we have received or do receive from the Finance Commission. The Finance Commission will discontinue receiving bound copies of monthly reports, which will be available online. And the interim reports for the fiscal year budget and the 5-year cap plan. Now, we get 12 of these a month for 6 people. We have 4 of these going through the entire process, and we have 4 of these for the 6. Now, I added up the number of papers. There's 120 bound documents for the Finance Commission alone, comprising over 13,000 pages. Now, we are discontinuing all except the final. And we've been working with Cindy and her team. So this is going to have, I don't know what impact on the $12,300 in the budget next year for finance, but it should have at least a dent. Finally, as a recommendation that was really championed by Cindy Lawson, is that to have a overview of the budget after the CAFRA is presented, because trying to go through 250 pages in terms of the unique way that government accounts, where minuses really are pluses and pluses are really are minuses. Cindy, if you just want to comment on some of the background work you've done on an overview after the CAFRA, I think that might be helpful for the public and the council.
One of the things that a lot of governments do is, in addition to the CAFR, they produce what the GFOA calls the Popular Annual Financial Report, where they take the CAFR and the many hundreds of detailed accounting information, and they boil it down to a more user-friendly, more layman's terms kind of financial report annually. I've found some really excellent examples of those over the years, and I want to share a few with the Finance Commission with the goal of trying to produce, as a follow-up to the formal CAFR, a popular annual financial report that we can post on our website and make available to people who want the Reader's Digest version in a way that makes sense to them and not necessarily want to go through all the details.
Ms. Larson, I welcome that so much. Since I carry my CAFR around with me, and you can see it's been well tabbed and used, it would be delightful to have a simple summary to that data. Yes. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Gray.
Okay. Well, we do have some initiatives that is going to dovetail into some of the discussions you just had. We had an in-depth analysis and review of the budget and the options. To that end, we are scheduling a future presentation by both the investment advisors and the actuaries, going over the options that are for the pension and what various impacts are, including the investment strategies and so forth. Secondly, we also are going to have a review of the health insurance and its cost. Its provisions and management is also going to be scheduled going forward. And finally, the Commission did provide a prospective 5-year going forward look, but that had presumed a early 2014. So in that end, obviously it's going to have to be revised as we have more clarity on the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Gore.
I do have, if you can forbear me, we did review the budget, and at our meeting, as I mentioned, we recommended no changes in the budget. However, we did have an extensive discussion of the role of the Finance Commission and the policy issues of the Council. And I have provided this as a public record, and I will try to give the Reader's Digest version, if you don't mind. The budget is a compact between the city and its residents to provide services, public safety, and amenities, which the residents will fund. In addition, there are business-like operations called enterprise funds. The governance of recreation, public works, police, administration, utilities, airport, marine, and cemetery is the responsibility of the elected city council, which decides and directs the costs of the municipality. As an appointed entity, our responsibilities as the Finance Commission, with direction from the city council, is to independently provide advice, critique, analyze, and to provide recommendations regarding the city's finances. Residents, taxpayers, and visitors will receive services commensurate with the revenues generated. Salaries and benefits of the general fund comprise over 75% of the expenses. Virtually all non-management employees are covered by collective bargaining agreements. Critically, providing competitive compensation is important to not only attract but to retain a skilled workforce. The city government has mandatory statutory requirements to balance the budget, maintain comprehensive fiduciary accounts, and comply with extensive legal and ethical standards. Investment of its resources must be conservative and risk-averse. All transactions and correspondence obviously covered by sunshine and are available to the public. To achieve a balanced budget, as operation efficiencies are implemented, revenues, especially property taxes, must cover expenses. Accordingly, the level and quality of services are contingent on the expectations of the community and the willingness to pay for them. The original budget, which proposed, was prepared by the staff in accordance with the City Council's guidance based upon a presumed early sale of the electric. That was in the next budget iteration was in fact removed, so the whole entire fiscal year was presumed that there would be no closing.
Peter, we have to close this meeting out before 6 o'clock.
Okay. Let me just say that the final budget may also be subject to minor revisions. You have voted on the millage rate, but clearly when the Vero Electric transaction is complete, the city will be confronted with a budget shortfall, which will require a combination of or reduction in either services or an increase in tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any other people in the audience who would like to speak to this issue? Seeing none, we will close the public portion of the meeting. Are there any comments by council?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I was under the presumption that the chief was going to make a presentation. Am I wrong in that or right?
Chief?
At the request of the council, the chief was going to make a presentation on the positions that were cut outside of the animal control, but this would be the CSI and a administrative position.
I'm sorry, before
Wayne.
you start, Chief Mayor, is it a requirement that we complete this meeting by 6? If we go longer, we could still start the city council meeting later than 6, could we not?
You could delay the start of your regular meeting, sure.
Okay. Go ahead, Chief. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. David Curry, Chief of Police. Thank you for hearing me this evening. Just wanted to talk to you about our positions with the police department. As you know, when we were asked in May to bring a proposal forth, it was a 10.9 reduction and a 14.9 reduction. With the police department, that equated to about $742,000 and a little over $1 million. And what we had to do there was, of course, look at personnel. With an operating budget of about $711,000, the only way we were going to meet those requests was personnel. So, as you know, with the budget workshop, we brought in the proposal with dispatch. There was 10 employees there, the animal control, and we've, of course, retained those positions, thankfully. And then there were 2 clerical positions and 1 crime scene tech. Now, the crime scene tech, we've actually not had since one of our positions since June 7th because the individual that we did have did not work out and they were let go during the probationary period. So we were actually allowed the last couple of months to see how we would be with just 1 crime scene tech. And there is a supervisor over that unit, but in our attrition plans to reduce in ranks, that sergeant will not be there in the very near future. So although that individual assists at this time, they're not really, they don't have the expertise that a crime scene tech may have or has to work a scene sufficiently. And I just wanted to give you some information from the crime scene department. In the on-scene and in-house processing, in 2012, we processed 663 pieces of evidence. We do our own fingerprint comparisons, which means efficient, timely investigations and our case clearance. As you know, our case clearance last year was over 40%. We did 995 fingerprint comparisons in 2012. Again, that was mostly with 2 people. We have on-call weekdays, weekends, and holidays. If we go to one crime scene tech, that's very, very tough to have one person work all day or into the evening and be on call and have to come back that night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock for a crime scene, and then come back to work again the next day. To keep rotating one person in that way is very, very tough. And in fact, we have a tech now that's probably one of the best in the area on the Treasure Coast. And I think if we subject this person to this type of workload only, then we may in fact lose that person down the road. If we have to train somebody and we have new people, there's no experience there to train. This person that we have now, if we bring someone on now, they have the ability to train, they have the knowledge, they have the expertise. So again, in regards to the burnout scenario there, just in August, as you know, we had 2 this past August that just ended, we had 2 bank robberies and 1 homicide, all in August. I'm happy to say, for the most part, they're all cleared, and we made an arrest, as you probably know, on the bank robber. And then we're working on putting a charge on our homicide case that happened up at Vera's Motel. But that alone, we had 1 crime scene tech, and there were over 100 pieces of evidence that had to be collected and processed and delivered to the crime lab. Again, that's 1 person. The weekend after the homicide, we had a sexual battery case at the hospital. Fortunately, it was unfounded, but that was 4 more hours that individual had to spend time working at the hospital and collecting evidence and that kind of thing. So I would really like to keep our 2 crime scene techs. We've always had 2. We don't feel that that's heavy-handed in any way. And we would really like to fill that spot come October 1 without question.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, at the hospital, Chief, wouldn't that come under the Sheriff's Department? Why was the Vero Beach Police doing a crime scene at the hospital?
We're there all the time. Anytime a crime's in the city, we respond. So
But
the
the
crime
hospital-
I was
happened.
going to say the
Not in the
hospital's
city.
not within the city limits.
The crime happened in the city.
Oh, I see.
That's the key.
Oh, okay.
crime
I thought
happened
you said
in
it
the
was at
city.
the hospital itself that it happened.
Well, the victim goes to be
Oh,
looked
certainly.
at, checked, what have you. If a crime happens in the city, then we work the case.
Okay, I misunderstood. I
Yes,
thought it
ma'am.
occurred at the
Yes,
hospital
ma'am.
itself. Then back to our benchmarking areas. I mean, the average number of civilian employees for police departments in our comparable cities is 12, and we have 22 civilian employees.
Right. Well, and remember, 10 of those are dispatchers. And one of the main reasons we made an arrest in August with our bank robbery and our homicide was in dispatch, very integral. And we're going to hear about
We
that a
all
little
agreed
bit
with
later.
dispatch. I'm just saying that our civilian employees considerably higher than anyone else's. That's also.
Mr. Mayor.
Anything else?
Mr. Mayor, I have
Yes.
a question. It's an educational question. Chief, if you would explain to me, and I'm sure the general public, what a CSI, a crime scene inspector, does different than a lieutenant or inspector or sergeant. I mean, what the skills difference is and why this is a concern. I don't know. I look at several of your fine people in the back row, and they look big and tough to me. I don't know why they couldn't go to a crime scene. And so tell me.
Sure.
I'd like to know.
And we currently, our officers that respond to scenes currently process smaller scenes that won't take as much because, as you know, we want them on the streets. If they're spending an hour or more on processing a scene as a police officer, they're not being effective on the streets patrolling our neighborhoods. So they will process, for instance, small car burglaries, things like that, criminal mischief, things that we don't want to spend overtime on, wasting the time to bring a tech out from their home, spending the time and costing time and a half in that regard. So our officers actually do process some scenes. The CIS are skilled. They compare and latent print examinations. When we process a scene and develop a print, they compare it to a suspect. They process the scene. They go to school for different things like blood spatter collecting of evidence, photography. They have that specialty expertise that the officers don't go to school for.
I'd like to ask you a leading question. Is it not true that with a crime scene inspector with a complicated crime like a murder or the bank robbery at SunTrust as an example, our chances of doing a good job of gathering information, cataloging it, and presenting it to court are better than if you did it? I'll pick on you, David.
No question about it. No question about it. I may have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, but it's not in crime scene. And without question, someone that's skilled in that knows how to collect the evidence, bring it back, and detailed, and not make in their reports, their photography, and how they collect evidence, it's without question can make or break a case.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'd like to make a suggestion. With the departure of one of your captains, you obviously have additional funds into the police department budget. I would suggest that council leave it to the discretion of Chief Curry how he distributes that, whether he chooses to reinstate that crime scene technician, or if there's some other more demanding needs in your department, that you expend that as you see fit.
Is that acceptable to you?
Well, I believe it is, but I wanted to speak a little bit about our clerical situation.
Well, let's
as well.
resolve this one first.
Yes.
Actually, I would close it into that issue too. I was going to say whatever, working within this budget.
Finance director needs to address that as it conforms to our budget.
The only thing we need to make sure we do, though, is adopt a budget that has a certain number of authorized positions. Right. And the other thing is, if we do want to swap that position for this other, I still have to either change the budget line items or leave them as they are, with the understanding that in other words, there will, if the plan, as I understand it, is to replace that person, but with a lower level officer, and there will be some net savings. However, if you're suggesting that net savings can be applied to reinstate this position, I think we'd still need to adopt a budget that shows the total number of authorized positions within that department.
So there'd be one more person, but hypothetically the dollars would be
go down a little bit. Exactly.
Is that acceptable, Mrs. Turner?
I had a question of Mr. Curry.
Yes, ma'am.
Does the capability exist that we could do some type of a sharing process with the county, utilize their crime scene investigators from the sheriff's office for specific high-profile and large scene needs that we would have?
Yes, ma'am, and we do already. For instance, the Simpson homicide on the beach, we use them, and without question. Because of such a large scene. We had 2 crime scene employees at the time. They both left. And honestly, and unfortunately, one of them left because they were overwhelmed just from that homicide. They had never worked before, and they were top-notch. And that was 2 at the time, and we still called upon them. And we don't hesitate to call the Sheriff's Department. We have a great working relationship with them. In fact, when we made an arrest on our homicide suspect a few weeks back after 12 hours from the incident, our crime scene tech was not on call, and so we needed expertise. We utilized the Sheriff's Department.
And how are the fees allocated to the Sheriff's Office when we do need to call them in? Is there a cost involved?
They pay
to
their
us?
salaries and we pay ours.
So, in other words, the Sheriff's Office does have crime scene investigators capable to help us if necessary. If
Yes,
something
ma'am.
comes in and you make the call,
Yes,
they'll
ma'am.
be there to help us.
Without question.
Ms. Larson, talking about our actual head count then, I did receive some extensive analysis, and I thank Ms. George for that on head count. And what she has given us is that as of August 24th, we have 430 budgeted full-time employees within the city.
And the proposed number for next fiscal year, the positions that would remain are 402. So
that's 402 budgeted positions. I want to make sure we're comparing the same numbers. Every time I ask for numbers, it's, whether they're budgeted, those that are filled, it gets to be a game.
I go by budgeted. Okay, I go by budgeted because if they're budgeted, they may come and go throughout the year, but the money's there to cover the position. So if you look at attachment A to the memo that you received, I think the information Ms. George gave you was the budgeted positions for 12-13 total 430. Mm-hmm. Whether they're all filled right now or not, I can't say. The budgeted positions that we've proposed for 13-14 total 402. And so I think what we're saying is if we want to swap money out to make a crime scene tech possible, this needs to be changed to reflect authorized positions of 403, budgeted positions of 403.
Well,
Because-
and as of actual August 24th, actual fill positions in the city are 399.
We've had a lot of turnover. We've had quite a bit of turnover. in the
True.
last
But
6
what
months.
I'm saying is that even, when we're looking at the budget, we're saying 402
Yeah.
to 399 is the difference.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I really would like, I'll stand in your decision, but I'd like to make a proposal that we leave it up to the chief and the city manager, but that we authorize 403 people as long as the number of dollars that are in the budget are not exceeded.
I would agree, Mr. Winger. This is an issue for the budgeting office and the city manager and the chief to work out.
Well, then I'll make that as a motion if you'll be kind of second it.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Chief, would you get with Mr. O'Connor and company and see how you can work that out? I'd
Yes,
like to
sir.
see your text stay myself.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Did you have more that you wanted to talk to us about or not? I don't know.
Yeah, the clerical end, and I know, Councilmember Turner, the numbers are important. I understand that, and the budget's important. We understand that, and we're moving forward as we talked about previously, and working with, of course, Mr. O'Connor and the council members as best we can. But I feel obligated as well to run an efficient department based on what I see is needed. And specifically referring to the crime scene tech, and now with a clerical position. At one time, we had a secretary, an administrative assistant with the operations division, the detective division, and the support services division. We no longer have that. At one time, we had 3 records clerks. We no longer have that. And this is just in the last couple of years. Currently, we have 2 administrative assistants that are working within the records department. They're helping those divisions as well as doing the records clerk functions. And then we have 1 front desk clerk. So if we went down to 1 essentially records clerk and 1 front desk clerk, to me, that's not going to be efficient work. We have almost 9,000 generated reports last year between citations, offense reports, field interviews, written warnings. All those have to be filed into our record management system alone. That doesn't count for our public records requests, answering the phone, customer service, the whole litany, if you will. And I have some other examples. But if we're faced with someone that's on annual leave and then one gets sick, there's no one there at the front desk or in the records department. So 2 as records clerk and 1 in the front desk, again, to me, does not seem heavy at all.
Mr. O'Connor, based on the request that we had made for the cuts, and based on the very good information that Mr. Curry has provided us in terms of the importance of all of his employees and his department, if we add these 2 back in, he's made no cuts. Is that correct?
One.
We had 2 of the clerical positions on the table, and that would be 1, yes.
But we
As far as
made no
personnel.
cuts in uniform officers.
Right.
No.
And believe it or not, with the reducing in ranks, as again we know Captain Touchberry is retiring, we're going to hire for that position as an officer. So essentially, the workload and the generated offense reports and paperwork could actually increase because we're
Nice.
Yes, ma'am. If you're putting an officer on the road and not promoting a captain, that officer is going to be working citations, written warnings. That's an extra officer, and we plan to do that as we do move forward with our reductions.
And we've already agreed that if we keep the number of employees the same that we've agreed to in the budget and let you guys determine who they are, I think that's sufficient.
I misunderstood that motion then. I think what I heard was we reinstate the CSI position and we cover it with the savings from replacing the captain with a lower level officer so that if we add 1 position back, there can't be any increase in the overall police department budget. Did I misunderstand
my
that?
intent.
Okay.
That was the intent.
So we will go to 72 authorized positions in the police department, but with no overall increase in the police department
Correct.
budget.
Right.
Okay.
Chief, you have some more?
No, sir.
Just a question: what's the dollar amount difference of having this this new clerk or this
Crime
staff
scene.
position?
Cindy and I both have that. A starting salary for a crime scene investigator is $28,080. That's the starting salary. The benefits with that, it looks at FICA medical and health comes to about $40,000, just over $40,000. And a police records clerk starts at $24,201. Actually, they start a little lower. Their 6-month increase is $24,201. With benefits, that's $35,000. So the two of them are about a $75,847 number.
Overhead.
So financially, could you not replace those two positions with the outgoing officer?
No.
No,
We-
sir. It's not that much difference if we're going to replace the officer.
If we want round numbers, it's $40,000 for the CSI, it's $36,000 for the records
about
clerk,
10,000 short.
and we're saving $61,000. So
Maybe about 10 or 15 short.
we'd be about 15 short. To put both back, we would be 15 short, and the overall police budget would go up. The motion you just made for the CSI, less the savings from the replacement with the lower level officer, would actually put you to good about 21,000. So.
But you wouldn't change the budgeted number of dollars anyway. In other words, would you or would you?
I would if on the motion you just made, we would change the salary line item to reflect the authorized positions and the FICA Medicare and the health insurance to reflect the authorized positions. I'm saying just there would be a net amount to the good. His budget wouldn't go up, but another 35 would mean it would go up by about 15.
In the interest of time, do we need to adopt a budget on this meeting?
Yes.
You have to adopt a budget of some kind. I mean, you can adopt it as amended to do exactly the motion you've already made, and then we'll mark it up, and you will have another public hearing and another final budget adoption on September the 17th.
Fine, then I'll make a motion to adopt the budget as amended. Get things moving.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
This takes a roll call.
Opposed?
Need a roll call?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Winger?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
No.
Mrs. Carroll?
Yes.
Mayor Fletcher?
No.
Passes 3-2.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks for your time.
So where do we stand now, folks?
It's the end of the terminate the budget hearing and move on.
Good. You're done with this.
You have anything else for us, Cindy?
No, you're good. You're done with this hearing. We will advertise our final public hearing for September the 17th, and at that point, you'll adopt the final millage and a final
this
budget.
meeting is now adjourned. We're going to give you